Hey folks, Matthew with Tactical Comms here, and I'm excited today to bring you a good friend of mine and meteorologist, Jessica Stumpf, to talk about some severe weather information, her sources, and some best practices. So, to start off with, welcome, Jessica. Thank you for taking time out and being on the video with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, give me a little background. Tell us about yourself and where you've been and what you're doing now.
Sure. So actually, I grew up in Northeast Ohio. I ended up going to Penn State. That's where I received my Bachelor of Science degree in meteorology. I actually started off in the broadcast sector of things for weather, starting off in WTAJ in Altoona, Pennsylvania, moved to News West 9 in Midland, Texas, and then finally went to WMBF News in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. So that's how I ended up here in South Carolina. After about 6.5 years in the TV field, I still loved weather, but I wasn't loving the TV aspect of it. So I was trying to figure out a way how I could still use my degree, but still help people and use it in a different way. And this is where it becomes a small world story. So while I was in Myrtle Beach, which is in Horry County, I learned that the emergency management director there at the time, Randy Webster, I grew up with his cousin's kids in Northeast Ohio. So really small world story. But I asked him if he'd be willing to sit down and have lunch with me and tell me a little bit about what he did. He said, absolutely. So we got lunch one day and he told me about what emergency management is and what he does. And I asked him if that was something that I could do, or do I need to go back to school for it? And he said, I wouldn't go back to school for it unless someone pays for it. But you can totally do this. And I think your meteorology degree would truly be an asset in the field of emergency management. So after my contract ended in Myrtle Beach, I ended up at the South Carolina Emergency Management Division as their individual assistance coordinator. So that was a recovery program. And then a year later, promoted into the earthquake program manager for the state. So I was the backup hurricane program manager. So I did a lot in the preparedness sector, a lot of planning, a lot of meteorological stuff too, supporting that, especially during the floods in 15. And Matthew in 16. So I was there for that. And then I made my way to Greenville County for a new position that Greenville County Emergency Management opened up, which was an emergency planning coordinator position. And then I rose through the ranks there to deputy director and director. So I was there during Helene. And at the beginning of this year, I made the transition into the private sector. And now I work for a company called Barron Weather, where I am a public safety solution engineer, which basically is a fancy way of saying I connect public safety entities with weather solutions to help them prepare and respond to weather events.
You know, that's some. I didn't realize the connection with Randy Webster. That was pretty cool. And then I met you when you were in the hurricane section. I mean, the earthquake section at EMD, and you know, earthquakes is something that we talk a lot about in South Carolina, and we have, it's not uncommon for us to have a small one, here in South Carolina, but we still plan for and prepare for the big one. And I think that's something that, hopefully takes the preparedness piece takes a theme in this video. But, something that you talked about in your bio is, that you were constantly preparing for the next step. And then when you talk about working for Barron Weather, that, your job is to basically give these tools and custom tailor these tools to public safety. And I think sometimes people get a misconception of what public safety can and can't do. Talk a little bit about how public safety, how does public safety make decisions on severe weather when it comes to evacuations and such as that?
They look at a lot of different pieces of information and data. They look at their emergency plans as well. But it's really important, first and foremost, that each of these public safety entities have some type of relationship with their local National Weather Service office. There are a lot of them all across the country. These folks are the ones who are our neighbors. They live in our areas. So they are looking at the weather that we're dealing with every single day. So I think first and foremost, having a good relationship with them, making sure you're having conversations with them. Those in public safety can get on Slack, which is their NWS chat. So you're able to have direct conversations back and forth with those folks that are actually working the desk that day. And then they do a couple of other events throughout the year, open houses and integrated warning team meetings and things like that to bring in their partners, because it's not just your emergency managers and police, fire, EMS. It's also your school districts and other folks that are involved in it too. So it's a whole community approach where we're pulling in all these partners in order to make these decisions and build these relationships, which are really important when things go bad.
Well, I think you're right. And, we were fortunate here in the upstate of South Carolina. We had a wonderful relationship with GSP, the weather office out of Greenville-Spartanburg Jetport. And, the conversations that take place in that Slack, I think is very, very informative. And it does help, us as public safety or former public safety, but it does help those public safety decisions to be made. And a lot of people, I think, sometimes think that public safety officials, emergency management, police, fire, EMS, have this secret squirrel backdoor channel that gets, super secret information ahead of everybody else. But the reality is it's roughly about the same time. It's just a conversation is taking place instead of it usually being a one-way conversation. And I guess what I mean by that is, there's no delay in the warning information going out to the public. I mean, it's just a two-way conversation in the public safety space, I think.
That's correct. And they're also taking information from public safety. There's a lot of institutional and local knowledge about certain rivers or creeks or areas that tend to flood or things of that nature that public safety officials have more knowledge of, that they can share that information with the Weather Service to help make those decisions. We've heard, terms over the past week about flash flood warnings and emergencies and tornado emergencies. Those flash flood emergencies that get issued, that's a two-way street notification that gets made in conjunction with the local county emergency management office. So the National Weather Service doesn't immediately just pull the trigger on a flash flood emergency. They're making that decision in conjunction with county emergency management.
That's a very good point. And I think, that brings us kind of to I can't even talk. I think it brings us to a good spot of, so how does that information get out? And something that I've seen is our communities almost live isolated now. We aren't really looking around and being aware of what's in our community, what risk, what threats, and if you blame it on what you want to, I think it's just life is busy. And so we obviously want to live in communities where we feel safe, but there's risk everywhere in wherever you live, whatever you do. Let's talk about some of the sources that are available for the general public to get this real-time information. And I'll try to remember to go back and post the link to it, but in my channel, there's a video where I talk about all hazards weather radios and even how to program a Bofang radio to receive the weather stations. I've said for years, you've said it, all of us in the emergency management world have always said, get an all hazards weather radio. It's $40 now that you're getting information. You're getting those warnings and alerts at the exact same time everybody else is getting it. What other sources are there?
I think you have to look at this as a layered approach, right? So a weather radio is a very good one because there's a battery backup available there. So even if your power goes out, you've got your batteries in that radio, it's still going to go off when they issue those alerts. The other is the thing that we carry around with us every day, our cell phones. There is a way to enable the emergency alerts in your phone, specifically the wireless emergency alerts. You've probably heard them with an amber alert going off or a tornado warning or a flash flood warning, but some people will purposely go in here and turn those alerts off. I think it's really important that we don't do that. We want to leave those alerts on. So for those of you that have an iPhone, and I imagine it's probably similar on other phones, if you go into your settings and go into your notifications, if you scroll all the way to the bottom of the notifications, you will see a section called Government Alerts. And there are several alerts in there that you can toggle on, including a Consider Local Awareness. So if you want the cell towers to maybe be a little more precise about your location, that's also an option that you can turn on. So I think it's really important that we make sure that those alerts are on in our cell phones. Again, some people get annoyed with them and they go in there and they turn them off and they forget about it. But I think it's important that we go back and we take a look at it. So that's another piece of a layered approach there. And then there's a couple of other options that are out there. Our local media stations, they have apps that will push out warnings to folks as well. You can also download a couple of different other apps that will push out weather alerts. Red Cross has some of those as well. So there are several different apps that you can utilize in order to receive some of those notifications. I think it's also a pretty good idea to stay aware of what your local news stations are saying and what your local meteorologists are saying. Again, these are our neighbors. They're here in our communities, and they're also the ones that are monitoring and watching this, and they have a great relationship with the local National Weather Service offices too. So if we look at doing this as a layered approach to receiving these notifications, so your cell phone, paying attention to the news and general situational awareness, having a weather radio, if we have a layered approach, then we should be getting those notifications.
I think something that we've also lost in the generation, and it's a generational loss, I believe. We've lost the person-to-person relationship. So when people move into a new community from other parts of the country, I think it's important to discuss with locals. Hey, what do you have tornadoes here? Do you have ice? Do you have snow? Do you have earthquakes? What do you have? What are the things that are common to us?
Yeah, absolutely.
What risk should I be worried about? What I don't know. What should I be doing to plan and prepare for? Because I think back to when we would close a road. If we had to lay a line, if we were in a fire and we had to lay a line across the roadway, we would close the road. And it always surprised me how many people had no clue how to navigate around. I mean, people that had been here their whole lives had no clue how to navigate around one stretch of road. And so I think that's where the normalcy bias comes into play. Is that's not going to happen here. I think we just don't think about it.
I think a lot of people kind of get that mindset that it's not going to happen to me. But at any point, any of us could be on our local or national news saying, I didn't think it would happen to me. We would rather be prepared for these types of things because you're going to be able to build back your life and recover a lot quicker than if you hadn't. I do think that, having general situational awareness, moving to a new area is hard. I've done it several times throughout my life and my career. But if you want to know the hazards that are going to impact you, do a quick Google search of your county, followed by the words emergency management. And a lot of times your county emergency management website will have a list of the hazards that do impact the county. You might be able to look at the county's hazard mitigation plan or their emergency operations plan and see the things that they're looking at to prepare for and respond to and ultimately recover from. Some of them even have historical information about the things that have already occurred in the county. For instance, Greenville County's emergency operations plan has a kind of like a historical annex. It goes back and takes a look at events that have occurred in the county and what happened. Was there a loss of life? Did it cause damages, and how much were those damages? So it goes back and takes a look at that. And so if those things have happened in the past, then they're going to happen in the future. We already know that that's going to happen. You talked about earthquakes early on here and how we have those small tremors in South Carolina, but we also know that in 1886, we had a 7.3 magnitude earthquake down in the Charleston area. And that was felt for thousands of miles just because the soil on the East Coast is different than that on the West Coast. So that caused a lot of issues across the Eastern Seaboard back in 1886. And we know it's possible that could happen again.
I think that is, I'm trying to remember who said it. If we fail to remember history, we're destined to repeat it or something to that effect. I can't remember exactly how that goes, but I think that's one of the things that in the comms world I've been talking about a lot lately is that so many of us have retired, moved on to other career paths, other things. And so the people who are replacing us have not yet had those experiences. Usually, Hurricane Helene, I think, taught a lot. It taught us a lot in our area. Most people that are in the workforce today have never known a life, or at least in our area, have never known a life without technology. And you think about that a second. We grew up before cell phones that were available, so we remember what that was like. And the people who are in those decisions now they don't have those experiences. So I think it's really difficult when old guys like me are saying we need to be preparing for this. We need to have a plan for this. We need to. They look at you with glass over eyes, going, "God, it was in the 1800s when we had the last earthquake." When so we face that. So what advice would you give to our community about staying prepared and becoming more prepared and resilient with respect to severe weather?
I think there's a couple of ways to do that. And I think first and foremost, we all have a personal responsibility to be prepared for these things. And I think that gets lost a lot of the times. We are responsible for ourselves. There are only so many first responders to go around, and they can't get to every single one of us when we need them, especially in a situation like a Helene, like the floods that just occurred in Texas. It's very difficult. So we have to be personally responsible for the things that we can, the things that we can control. And I think there's some good ways to do that. In South Carolina, there is this app. It's called the SC Emergency Manager app. And I even tell people who are not in South Carolina to download this app because it's a great tool to help you prepare, not only build like an emergency plan for your family, but also what should go in your emergency supply kit. That's all set up for you, and you can build out your plan. You can import your insurance information, your pets and veterinary information, any records that you need to. You can PDF that plan and then text it, email it so your family has it. Everyone knows what the plan is. It doesn't get any simpler than that. It's right at the fingertips of right on your phone. So easy to do, and you don't have to live in South Carolina to utilize it in that form. So I think that's one of the easiest ways to do that, but you have to discuss that plan with your family. It's really important that all family members know what the plan is. If something happens in the neighborhood, where's the meeting place outside the neighborhood? If you are not at home and can't get home, where is that meeting place where everyone can go? Because if communications are down, you can't contact each other to figure out where that is. But if you've already got this plan in place beforehand, then everyone knows where they're supposed to go. Or if they can make contact with one family member, everyone contacts the same family member if they can, and lets them know, hey, I'm okay and this is where I am. There's ways to go about this, but I highly recommend downloading that app because it helps you build that plan. Now, in terms of building what should go in your emergency supply kit, there's a list on this app as well. And I know there's a concern that, this can be costly trying to build out your emergency supply kit. If you go and try to get everything at once, that can be a big expense. And, we have a lot of folks, we're not independently wealthy. We live paycheck to paycheck. So how do we build that kit? And I tell folks each time you go to the grocery store, maybe pick up one or two items that's on that list. So maybe this week when you go to the grocery store, you pick up a case of bottled water and some canned goods. And then maybe the next time you go to the store, you pick up batteries. And the next time you go to the store, you pick up some other dry goods, something along those lines. So it's not one big expense at the same time. And then schedule a time each 6 months or each year to go through that kit and make sure nothing in there has expired that needs to be replaced. You're muted, Matthew.
I was trying to get rid of some of that background noise.
Okay.
That's some really good information. And so I went and looked real quick just to make sure. But, a good website is ready.gov.
Absolutely.
Ready.gov has a lot of good information. And, I even when I teach community preparedness courses, I talk about ready.gov. And FEMA has said for years, you need to have 72 hours of resiliency for every member of your household. As long as I can remember, that was the message from FEMA, and it probably even goes back to the Civil Defense Days. One of the commenters on the YouTube talked about civil defense a while ago, and I think somewhere along the line we've kind of got maybe a little bit lazy because things are so accessible because it's so easy to get things. But then when you have a Helene event, I mean, even like for us around here, it was. We weren't hit anywhere near as hard as Western North Carolina, but so many gas stations didn't have power. They had gas, but they didn't have power. And the ones that did have power, people were panic buying. We saw that at a grocery store. Ingles in our area couldn't take card payments; they could take cash only. Then there were several restaurants that couldn't take card payments that were cash only. So there's a lot of things. But Ready.gov, the app, the SEMD app, that talks about things like that. And you are spot on with encouraging people, hey, you don't have to do this all at one time. Start now, a little bit here, a little bit there. And I think that's great information. And Ready.gov does still exist. I did check the website.
It does, and they also have specific information. So for pets, for children, for those with mobility needs, they have a lot of different folks in there, or types of information in there to help in those types of situations. Because we all have family members or friends who maybe utilize a walker or a wheelchair, or maybe hearing aids or glasses or something that they're going to need post event to help them. So it gives you some more ideas on how to help those folks prepare too.
And that's good stuff. Obviously we've already seen a tropical storm off the coast of South Carolina. We saw a press release today where our former USAR team is deploying some resources to Texas as well. But any advice you would give to communities that coming into the hurricane season about hurricane preparedness? Anything that you haven't already covered?
If you are in a hurricane evacuation zone, I think it's really important to know which one you are in and which route you're going to take to get out. In some counties, depending on where you live, they want you to take a certain way to evacuate. So I think it's really important to check your county emergency management websites. In the SEMD app, there is a Know Your Zone portion where you can type in your address and it'll tell you what zone you are in. So I think it's really important. And even if you're going to go vacation along the coast this summer and into the fall, I think it's really important to know when you go, where's the county emergency management website? How do I get information if I need it? What zone am I in? Am I staying in? Am I even in a zone? I think all of that is really important information to know. And, leave before you think you're going to need to. I mean, people wait until the last minute. And I think the fear is that people are going to end up stranded on the road with rising water. The only reason we evacuate for hurricanes is due to rising water. It's not because of the wind and it's not because of the rain. It's because of the rising water, the storm surge. What we learned last year, and this has always been a concern of mine, is that the storms that come in from the Gulf of Mexico tend to have greater impacts in the upstate of South Carolina. And so we saw that Helene was a prime example of how that occurs. And so even if you live further away from the coast and you are well inland, you still can be impacted by tropical systems. So when you're looking at the forecast track of a hurricane, when you're watching it on the news and looking at the National Hurricane website, just remember you're looking at where the center of the storm is forecast to go. The impacts extend far out from the center of the storm, to include tornadoes, to include heavy rain that causes flooding, that winds. There's a lot of things that can happen with these storms because they get so big. And once they make landfall, they actually expand in size. And that's why you see these impacts so far out from the center of the storm. But I think one thing that is also important is to understand what's the difference between these watches and warnings that are being issued. Your tropical storm watches and warnings and hurricane watches and warnings, those are based strictly on the wind. They are not based on the storm surge. They are not based on the rainfall accumulations. They are strictly based on the wind. Your storm surge watches and warnings, those are based on the storm surge. Then you have your flood watches that go into effect. So there's a lot of things that get issued ahead of these storms. And it's really important to understand the difference between those watches and those warnings. The watches are, hey, pay attention. This is your cue to pay attention and watch out because some bad weather is on the way. A warning is you've got to take action. Even if you feel like, well, they've issued a warning before and nothing has happened, that's when we become complacent. It's really important that warning, we take action and we put our emergency plan into place.
And I think that's a great point, is how many people misunderstand watches, warnings, and there's so much conflicting information. And I know in a lot of cases it's not by intent, but it's we see this in social media. People with well-meaning intentions, they start posting stuff, it starts getting shared, it starts going viral. And so I think understanding the difference between watches and warnings. And I go back to that all hazards weather radio. When you start taking advantage of those same weather alerts, you can drill it down to just your local area that you're going to get warnings and watches, or however you set it up for.
Mhm.
And I think that's so relevant. And February, I believe it's April of 2020. We had a rash of tornadoes come through the
Okay.
upstate, and so we were all texting. All of us that you were in the group, several other of
Mhm.
our friends, and we literally had to shelter in place and wait for the tornadoes to pass before we could get out and go to work. And I
I
think,
do remember that. I remember being in my bathroom
yep,
downstairs. My parents were living with me at the time. I had the dog in there. I had to yell at my dad to get downstairs into the bathroom. But we were all texting one another, and I remember having my laptop, my iPad, my phones, like everything, keeping an eye on everything, telling everyone, "Hey, there's the debris. That tornado is going right through Seneca right now." I remember that. But we did. We had to wait until it was safe for us to go ahead and respond.
and I think that's a big thing people misunderstand too. So uh, if I could give a takeaway message, when we start seeing those warnings, and particularly for hurricanes, for tornadoes, for floods, things that what people don't realize is when we wait until it's too late to take action on a warning,
Mhm.
um, we help may not be able to get to us. And it's not because they don't want to, it's not because they're not going to try. It's just it may not be, it just may not be possible. I mean, I keep going back to Helene, because the upstate of South Carolina, Western North Carolina, we've never seen damage like that. The
Mhm.
closest I remember that was Hurricane Hugo in '89. And but even just the trees, one of our local EMS and fire agencies and fire departments, they were trapped.
Mhm.
They were isolated for 12, 14 hours. And it wasn't because people weren't trying to get to them. There was just that much damage. And
Mhm.
so I think people need to really take a step back and start looking at these sources of information, reliable official sources. And when a warning comes out, when a watch comes out, I think the best way I know to describe it is when that watch comes out, hey, have I got my plan together? Do I know where everything's at? Am I ready to move? But when that warning comes out, it's time to take action.
Exactly. Exactly. Have you ever seen the memes where, they do watch warning and watch is like all the ingredients to make a cake, and then the warning is the cake is done, like it is time. So think about it in that way. Or even, you're making tacos, all the ingredients for tacos, that's the watch. Your taco is done. It's ready to be eaten. That's your warning. And it's time to move.
Well, that's awesome. Is there anything else that you'd like to say, or anything you'd like to add?
I mean, I think in general, it goes back to that whole, we have a personal responsibility, to pay attention and be prepared. We have a personal responsibility to educate. Those of us that are in public safety, I think we're in a prime spot to be able to educate folks about where to find reliable sources of information. If you want to go to the local National Weather Service website, if you just type in weather.gov and then click on your area, that's going to take you right to your local area. Same thing with, hurricanes.gov. That's where you'll get all your hurricane information. But again, making sure you have those layered approach to receiving notifications. So the weather radio, making sure that you have the wireless emergency alerts turned on your phone, signing up for, your local media stations, notifications, or the Red Cross app, or whatever your choice of app is, to make sure that you have those multiple ways to receive severe weather information. And just understanding that, that we all have an inherent risk wherever we live. We're all susceptible to something, and we have to learn about those things that we are susceptible to. Even if it hasn't happened while we have been there, it has probably happened in the past, and it will happen again.
That's very, very true. I guess the last thing, you mentioned Barron, earlier in the podcast. Do you want to give a quick shout out, tell our viewers about Barron?
Yeah, Barron Weather is a weather company that was started back in the late 1980s. Bob Barron, our founder, he was a broadcast meteorologist in Huntsville, Alabama, and that's where our headquarters is located. And Mr. Barron was actually on air, on air meteorologist, but there was a tornado that went through downtown Huntsville. It was an F4 tornado, and it killed a lot of people. And he made it his mission to figure out, how do we do this better? How do we forecast these things better? How do we provide alerting and warning better? How do we help people? And that has really been the mission of Bear and Weather, is to figure out how we can help people, whether it's individuals, whether it's businesses, government entities, and that's what we do. So we have web-based solutions, API, GIS solutions. So we work with anyone who wants to receive, weather information, through web sources or API or GIS, and that has long been the mission of Bear and Weather, is how do we do this better, and how do we do technology, make technology better, and how do we increase warning times and help people be safe ultimately.
Awesome. Well, awesome. I know our group they're quickly becoming fans of Bear and Weather. So that's good stuff. Well, thank you so much for taking your time. And this is the first format like this for me, and I hope it won't be the last. So I appreciate you taking the time with me.
Anytime. I'm here. Anytime you would like to have a conversation about things that are weather related.
Thanks, and thanks everybody for watching. I hope you have a great week, and you stay weather safe.